Black man gave up his first-class seat to a pregnant woman. But what happened next was more than he expected. Michael, an ordinary black man, was sitting comfortably in the first-class section of an international flight. While his life might not have been a fairy tale, he always made those around him feel special, as if every moment mattered. So why would he choose to sacrifice his position, a first-class seat, for a tired, pregnant woman worried about her unborn child? When Michael sees Emily and Mark, a young, nervous couple looking for seats, he realizes that there is something he can do. And so, with a gentle smile, he gets up from his first-class seat and offers it to them. But what happens next? Will the price of his sacrifice push him into a dangerous confrontation he never expected? It all begins when Michael realizes that behind Emily's grateful eyes lies an untold story. A story involving serious financial hardships, risky investments, and people who can change their lives or ruin them. Will Michael be able to help them overcome their difficulties? Or will he himself be caught in a spiral from which he cannot escape? And will those around him see clearly that what he is doing is right, or will they judge him accordingly? Follow the story to see that one person's small actions don't always lead to a simple result. And sometimes, one right decision can change a whole life, not just someone else's, but your own. The flight was about to take off. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was filled with a comfort that few could resist. Michael, a black man, relaxed in his comfortable seat, enjoying the comforts he rarely experienced. He had lived a simple life, but there was one thing he was good at: making others feel special. In such quiet moments, when the rest of the passengers were immersed in their own comforts, Michael observed the people around him, as if he was always looking for small pieces of life that could sometimes be forgotten. Looking out the window, he saw a pregnant woman dragging her tired legs, a look of concern on her face. She and her husband Mark were trying to find seats close together, but it seemed like nothing was going right. Emily, 7 months pregnant, her face glistening with sweat, her eyes warily scanned the empty seats, but the space didn't seem to be meant for her. Michael couldn't help but notice her eyes. There was confusion and anxiety in them, as she couldn't find a suitable seat as the plane was about to take off. Her steps seemed to slow down. Each step seemed longer and heavier because she was not only tired, but also anxious about how she would be able to sit down and rest during this long flight. He looked down at his first-class seat, where he was comfortably seated, where not many people could step foot. A big sacrifice, but in that moment it became small compared to helping a woman carrying a small life. Michael did not hesitate. He stood up, gently stepped out of the seat, looking at Emily with a warm smile, as if giving her a wordless invitation. "Do you need a seat?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Emily looked up confused, not understanding what was happening. But a second later, her eyes sparkled with gratitude. Michael had given up his comfort to help her get a seat on a flight where she shouldn't have to worry about such trivial things. Mark, the husband standing next to her, sensed the kindness in the gesture. He smiled and said, "Thank you so much. That was unexpected." Michael just smiled, not needing words to explain. His actions made everything clear. "That's what I should do," he said, then turned to help Emily into her seat. In that brief moment, the three of them shared a wordless connection, and even though it was a small gesture, it was enough to warm the cold air of the flight. As the plane began to taxi, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin seemed to lighten, as if not only the physical space, but also the emotions in everyone's hearts had been soothed. Emily sat back in her seat, feeling the softness of the chair, but the surprise in her eyes did not subside. She looked at Michael, the man who had just given up his comfort to a stranger, and suddenly felt a wave of warmth rising in her heart. In a world where there was sometimes only competition and selfishness, she could not believe that there was someone willing to do so without hesitation. Emily's husband, Mark, looked at Michael with appreciation clear on his face. He knew it was not a simple act, but a choice of kindness, one that transcended personal convenience. "Thank you so much," Mark said, his voice warm and sincere. "Not only did you help my wife, but you gave us all a little faith in the goodness in this world." Michael just smiled, his eyes flickering over Emily's face, then lingering for a moment longer. "It's what I should do," he replied, not with pride, but with the simplicity that truly kind people carry. He didn't need thanks, didn't need praise, because he knew that help that comes from the heart never needs to be repaid. As the plane continued to take off, the space around the three of them seemed to become quieter, with only gentle conversations and small exchanges between them. They talked about the simple things in life, about work, about dreams, about family, and about simple but meaningful things. Emily felt the sincerity in Michael's words, and a deep sense of gratitude filled her heart. Even though he was a stranger, his actions gave her an indescribable feeling, the warmth of a person willing to share not only physical space, but also kindness and humanity in a world that was sometimes too cold and hasty. In that moment, Mark turned to Michael, his eyes no longer filled with gratitude, but with a subtle connection. A feeling of having known each other for a long time, even though they had only just met on this flight. "You really did something special," Mark said, his voice warm, but filled with gratitude. "If I may, I would like to buy you a coffee as a way to thank you for this action." Michael smiled, his simplicity unchanged. He nodded and said, "I don't need anything, but I'm glad you feel comfortable." However, the warmth in Mark's invitation was undeniable, and the atmosphere seemed to lessen the distance that strangers usually felt when meeting each other. Michael felt the sincerity in that invitation, and deep down, he also wanted to share something, not out of obligation, but because of the joy of meeting kind people. Emily, sitting next to her husband, looked at Michael with gratitude and a small smile. "Thank you," she said, but her thanks were not just words, but a reflection of the deep emotions of a pregnant woman who clearly felt the care for her. She continued, "Not everyone can act like you, and I really appreciate that." They talked more about life, the simple joys of family, the worries about the future, and the dreams each of them had. Mark shared about his work and the difficulties his family was facing, while Emily confided in him about the changes in her life as she prepared to welcome her first child. Michael listened, and with each word, he felt a deep empathy for them. He realized that life was not just about the hustle and bustle, not just about plans and goals, but also about moments of connection, even if it was just a short flight, that it was full of human love. Michael felt he was beginning to understand something profound. Sometimes, true relationships and connections don't need to be built over a long period of time, but can arise in spontaneous, simple moments that can change the way you look at life. And now, in this airplane cabin, he realized that human love can magically connect strangers' hearts, even in seemingly small and fleeting situations. For a brief moment, his eyes swept over Emily, and he noticed something different about her. A little nervousness, not easily noticeable by just looking at her gentle smile. She was trying to hide something. Mark, noticing Michael's attention, began to share more about the project their family was involved in. But there was something in his voice that made Michael feel the anxiety rising. Mark's story seemed to be more than just a business project, but also a great burden that his family was bearing. The two did not directly talk about the financial difficulties they were facing, but Mark's words still could not hide the fatigue and hesitation in each decision. Emily, seeing the concern in Michael's eyes, explained gently, but still couldn't hide the tension in her words. My family is facing a lawsuit," she said, her eyes slightly averted, as if not wanting to make the atmosphere worse. "It's not easy, but we'll try." Michael looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He knew that not everyone was willing to share these things with strangers, but Emily did, as if she believed that there might be some comfort in this conversation. It made Michael feel something deeper inside. He understood that sometimes what people needed weren't grand gestures, but presence, listening, and small words of encouragement. This coincidence made Michael suddenly realize that life is not just a series of flights back and forth, not just fleeting moments. Sometimes we meet people, and in those brief moments, their stories can change a life. He did not know if he could help them, but he decided that, if he could, he would not let this opportunity pass by without doing something. Michael felt a strange connection to Emily and Mark, a feeling that came not from compassion alone, but from a place deep within him where real relationships are built. He wanted to continue to be a part of their story, even if it was just a small support, but enough to help them find a little hope in these difficult days. When Michael returned home from his flight, he couldn't stop thinking about Emily and Mark. The words they shared kept ringing in his head, like unfinished puzzle pieces, urging him to find out more. His uneasy feeling made him decide to start looking for information about Clyde Harris, the man Emily and Mark had mentioned, someone who might be related to the financial difficulties their family was facing. Clyde Harris was a big name in the community, a man of influence, a prominent investor, and a longtime partner of Emily's family. At first, Michael had only heard of Clyde as a businessman, but as he began to dig through the records and notes, the complex connections between Clyde and Emily's family became clearer. Each page he turned made him feel like he was being dragged into a tangled financial maze. The investments, the deals Clyde had made with Emily's family in the past, all showed signs of being amiss. The debts they incurred, and especially the shady contracts, could lead to a financial crisis from which there was no way back. It felt as if he was pursuing a secret that no one wanted to tell, and with every step he took, Michael felt the weight of responsibility. He knew that if he didn't unravel these mysteries, Emily and Mark would pay a terrible price. However, he was also aware that uncovering the truth could change their lives and his own. His next steps were not just an investigation, but a choice that could affect destinies, a mission he felt he couldn't ignore. Michael no longer felt like an outsider in Emily and Mark's story. Every detail he discovered, every little clue, drew him closer to a truth that could change everything. There was no turning back, and in his mind, a strong resolve had formed. He would not leave them to face these challenges alone. The confrontation that Michael and Emily's family were preparing for was not an easy one. They decided to meet Clyde Harris, the man who had caused the financial troubles that Emily's family was struggling with every day. Michael had no idea that this meeting would be so tense and dramatic. They chose a fancy coffee shop where Clyde often went to do business, believing that the space would be private enough for the confrontation to go smoothly. But the atmosphere at this time, instead of being pleasant, was strangely heavy. Michael could feel the tension in his every step. Mark and Emily sat across from Clyde, their eyes reflecting everything that had happened in the past. Clyde, calm on the outside but unable to hide the anxiety in his eyes, clearly felt that today would not be like the other meetings. Michael began to ask questions, each question slowly, like a hammer, making it impossible for Clyde to deny what had happened. Michael presented clear evidence of the debts, shady investments, and shady transactions that Clyde had participated in. A minute of silence passed, and then the truth exploded. Clyde could no longer deny it, his excuses becoming lost and weak in the face of undeniable evidence. Looking at Clyde, the man who had previously made Emily and Mark trust him, now unable to find any excuses. It was all too clear, and he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of relief rising in his heart, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew that what he had done was not just an act of self-interest, but an act of protecting justice, protecting the family he had decided to accompany. In the end, as Clyde got up to leave, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. Not because he had won this confrontation, but because he knew that sometimes help comes from persistently seeking the truth, facing the lies, and doing what you believe is right. He smiled, and not just to himself, but to Emily and Mark. They no longer had to suffer in the dark. The truth had come to light, and now they could all move forward with a new hope. Everything was settled, and the air in the car that took them back from the airport was now filled with an eerie silence. Michael looked out the window, the clouds drifting by like a gentle painting, reflecting his thoughts. The war with Clyde was over, but the truth they had found was not just a legal victory, but a victory in their own hearts. Emily and Mark sat next to each other, their eyes filled with gratitude, as if they had found a guiding light in the darkness. Emily turned to Michael, taking his hand gently but firmly, as if to thank him not just with words, but with everything she had to offer. "You changed our lives," she whispered, her voice soft but carrying a deep weight. Mark looked at Michael, nodded, his eyes shining with an indescribable appreciation. They didn't need to say anything more, because the connection between them was beyond words. Michael just smiled softly, feeling the warmth rising inside him. He knew he had done the right thing. In those moments, he didn't feel alone, didn't feel lost in a world that was too loud and chaotic. He felt like he was part of something bigger, part of the journey of the people he had helped. But they weren't the only ones. Michael had also realized this important thing in his own life. His inner peace came not from achieving personal success, but from helping others overcome challenges they thought they could not overcome. He felt a sense of peace, as if the waves he had touched were now calm. He understood that life is not just about personal gain, but also about the small, yet profound impacts we leave on the lives of others. These moments, he knew, would stay with him for the rest of his life, as reminders of the power of kindness and perseverance. And whether this journey ends or not, one thing is certain. Michael has not only changed the lives of Emily and Mark, but his own life has been reshaped by the people he has helped. His peace is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey.